Hi, everyone. Welcome to AI EDU Crafters, the podcast where we explore how artificial intelligence is transforming education, from pedagogy to product, from vision to impact. I'm your host, E. I'm an education researcher and a software engineer passionate about building the future of learning. Today's episode is a special one. I'm joined by Jason Green, a co-founder and president of Your Way Learning, formerly known as Link. Jason is a Wharton MBA, a Penn GSE graduate, and a best-selling co-author of Blended Learning in Action. But more than that, he is a passionate advocate for equity, student-centered learning, and meaningful educator support. In this conversation today, we'll unpack Jason's personal journey from youth development to edtech leadership, dive into the founding story of Your Way Learning, and explore what it really means to build an AI-powered teaching assistant that's actually pedagogically aligned. We'll also talk about Your Way's new collaboration with the University of Pennsylvania, launching an online course for non-technical educators who want to integrate generative AI meaningfully in their practice. So if you've ever wondered how to build an AI product that truly supports teachers and how to bridge pedagogy and engineering, or why AI needs to be rooted in equity and research, you are in a thoughtful, energizing ride. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Yi. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Oh, anytime. I am super thrilled to have you today. We talked briefly, on Google Meet before, and your stories were so fascinating. I heard about your story before, but my audience haven't yet. To me, your career has spanned from hands-on youth development to edtech innovation. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your journey? What inspired you to focus on transforming education through technology?
Absolutely. So again, thank you so much for having me. My journey definitely has been deeply personal. And I'll go back just a little even before that to my days as a learner. And a story that I often share is when I was even elementary school, middle school, I found myself oftentimes in classrooms being distracted, not following the teacher, having a really hard time keeping up. And I would turn to, let's say, my classmate and I would ask for help. And there was several times where my classmate might say something to me that kind of opened up the learning. And so I found myself being a very peer-to-peer learner. And so there was many times when I was in a traditional lecture classroom where I was just lost. I was just sitting there and I would wait until the class was over to go and do my learning separately because I realized as a learner, I learned best when I was working in groups. I learned best when I was talking with my peers. I learned best when I was working through, problems. Let's say it was math or chemistry. And so as a learner, most traditional classrooms, even up to college, didn't work for me. And that was tough. And during my college years, something else happened. I began to better understand different learning environments. And I found that the classes that were more discussion oriented, that were more hands-on, I was like, oh, this is great. This is amazing. I'm like engaged in the classroom. And so for me, this really starts as for me as a learner that struggled in traditional classrooms and then had these experiences during college that really had me realize that wait a minute, there's other ways that learning can happen. So during my junior year in college, I started to do some mentoring and tutoring at a neighborhood high school. And that wasn't necessarily at that point my career path. I was planning to go to law school, but I was doing this mentoring at a neighborhood high school. And I was working with, in some cases, sophomores and juniors, even seniors that were still at second, third, fourth grade reading level. And I, quite frankly, saw myself in some ways in them because I'm saying these are individuals who probably also haven't had a classroom that's worked for them. And so my senior year in college, I was at Morehouse College in Atlanta. I decided with a lot of thought that this was the challenge that I wanted to tackle in my professional career. I wanted to figure out ways that we could transform or revamp the classroom to better support various learners, whether you were somebody who needed to be in small groups or benefited from projects or benefited from collaboration or whatever it might be, that we began to really think about classrooms differently so that there would be an opportunity for any learner to sit in a classroom and have an experience, an environment that actually works for them.
That is so powerful. Like from many guests I have talked with on this episode, one common pattern I've actually noted is that each of us start from our personal experiences.
Yeah.
It's always this personal spark that made us wonder a lot early in the childhood. And that becomes like your north star somehow along the way, and you couldn't just negate or refuse the passion. Like you mentioned, you wanted to go to law school, but you did something maybe many people think was considered as, less quote unquote successful, less personally, acknowledgement or achievement. But you do this for the public. At the same time, I believe at the bottom of your heart, you always you always did it for yourself, especially the younger version of you that you always wanted kind of education.
Yeah, I really do believe that my mom was an educator. She worked in social work and was in schools her almost her entire career. And so definitely I grew up with an education kind of model around me every single day. And I saw the care that she had. And as a social worker, she was oftentimes working with the students that were having challenges. And so there was a deep compassion for, once again, how do we support every learner, right? How do we support every learner, even when their needs are coming from diverse social, emotional, learning, what have you? How do we create these environments that support every learner? So absolutely, this has been a deeply personal journey. It's been one that I can't imagine doing anything else with my career.
Yeah, and I feel like very early on, you were super hands-on.
Yeah.
You went to mentor the high school kids in person, and you started to practice. What I learned when I was in doctoral program is about universal design of learning,
Yeah.
UDL.
Yeah.
And you probably are practicing without even aware, like, oh, there's actually UDL there. So I wonder, did you notice any need for um, diversity in terms of pedagogy or pedagogical alignment when you are faced with students of different needs? It's not just the needs, like currently we talk a lot about neural diversity, but also like students with needs of different socioeconomic backgrounds.
Yeah.
We all struggle in different ways, but you are practicing that in person. So did you notice any of this pedagogical inspirational, even pedagogical walls you were hitting, right? Because you were not at that time like a trained with education
Yeah.
background, yeah, until
Yeah.
you went to Penny GSE.
Yeah. So I remember there was I'm going to share kind of three phases of this journey. So during this time where I was just out of college, I started to do this kind of more formal youth development work. I was a motivational speaker. And I remember one of the activities that I did, I was a young guy, I was 22 years old. I didn't have any background in pedagogy. But I remember one of the activities that I did with some of our learners was we played with Legos, literally, where we just played with Legos. And one of the groups was building, a car. Another group was building a plane. Another group was building something else. But I saw these students that were considered disengaged from classrooms. When they had a chance to play with Legos, they were like, "Oh, this is fun. Let's do this." And so that for me was one of my first experiences, again, before I was trained in pedagogy, of what it looks like for students to do something, a modality of learning that was non-traditional, but that had them engage more deeply in their learning. And then when I had the opportunity to go to Penn GSE, who's now one of our partners, there's a deep learner-centered pedagogical frame that Penn GSE brings to the table. They're very, I learned about constructivism. I learned about Piaget. I learned about these different techniques and these theories of learning that I had no idea about before, but I began to connect some dots and say, wow, this learner-centered pedagogy is really interesting. But of course, when you're in graduate school, a lot of it initially is very theoretical. It's very conceptual. But I began to better understand where these theories of learning came from and some of the roots of them. And so post-graduate school, I myself and a group, we started a tutoring company that basically did high dosage tutoring. And it was in environments that were not unlike where I mentored in college. In many cases, they were lower socioeconomic backgrounds. In many cases, it was students that weren't necessarily getting diverse learning experience in their classrooms. So when we began our tutoring programs, we brought in projects-based learning. So if you're learning math, let's start a business. We brought in music. So if we're learning our phonics or our phonemes, let's bring in a song. If we're doing books, literacy. If we're doing comprehension, let's make sure that there's books that have various characters that look like the learners that are in the story, or that look like the learners themselves. And so what we began to do was create these different, much more learner-centered, group-oriented, collaborative social environments. And there was one day when it really hit me, and that was we would sometimes pick students up in a school bus after school. So these are students that many people said didn't want to learn. I was in a school bus and students would run from their school building to the school bus to go to learn. And then I said, this is not the students. This is the environments that they're in that aren't working for them. Because if you change the environment of learning, the experience of learning, you bring in projects, you bring in music, you bring in tactile experiences, you bring in these ways that students can engage more deeply, learner-centered pedagogy, that same learner that was tuned out during the lecture is now engaging deeply in their learning process. So for me, this became very real of what it looked like to truly transform and reimagine what classrooms could be and how students can respond to them.
That's awesome. Every time when I heard about this story, told me like students were running to
Yeah.
the tutoring school. I was so fascinated. And you also mentioned earlier that so you draw learnings from your observations. You also draw learnings from your hands-on experiences and draw learning from formal schooling from Penn GSE. And then you co-authored Blended
Yeah.
Learning Action Book. And this is, again, so fascinating to me because I kind of feel you transform knowledge, like the way you generate knowledge and spread it is so multidimensional. Usually people are only able to do it one way, but you're able to, I mean, you basically were doing exactly the name of the book is, right? Blended learning for yourself first. And I'm curious about the experience because later we're gonna talk about generative AI, and I'm sure we're gonna unfold a lot about what AI means to you, but I want to learn more about how like your personal experience of knowledge acquisition, transformation, and distribution
Yeah.
of extracting knowledge, especially encoded knowledge, and decoded them in many different ways. And I wonder, if that has more or less changed how you think about teaching and spreading your knowledge. Because right now, in your way, you are supporting teachers directly, not just students.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, it's a fascinating question, Yi. So, and thank you so much for saying that because I hadn't thought about it quite that way. So what I realized is I'm deeply fascinated with the learning process. I'm also deeply fascinated with how the brain works. And this is kind of a newer exploration for me around neuroscience and literally like what does it mean to be in a learning process and a learning mode. So a couple of things happened that prompted my, I don't want to say shift, but expansion into adult learners. So fast forward about 5-6 years, working very deeply with students, seeing these results, seeing students light up when they're given these different modalities of learning, seeing students actually engage more deeply in projects and these different exercises, and then around 2010, you probably remember, that's when technology began to become much more available in schools, whether it was laptops, certain digital exercises or curriculum, digital content, various digital resources became more available. And there was a time in the early 2010s where we thought that technology was going to literally transform classrooms. Like that's what everybody thought. And I remember walking into my first classroom that had bought these one-to-one laptops. I go into the classroom expecting this kind of transformed experience, and the laptops were in the closet.
hmm.
And the teacher was lecturing at the students the same way that she did before the laptops got there. And I saw this, and then I saw it again and again and again. These districts that were in schools that were investing in technology, and the technology, if being used at all, was not having this transformative impact. So then I began to think about a different question, which was, what if we could do something similar with the teachers that we did with the students? Meaning, what if we could reimagine the teacher's learning experience and have an even more exponential impact on learning? Because if you can do that at teacher level, now you're actually doing you're exponentializing the opportunity for impact. So that had me say and begin to look at, okay, we've spent this time on student-centered learning, right, and pedagogy. What is this thing called andragogy?
Hmm.
And how do we begin to bring in andragogy into how we're thinking about and developing teachers? So that's when things really got interesting for me, even beyond the pedagogy piece, because what we saw was those laptops in the closet were there because we were giving teachers technology, but there was still the same mindset toward I deliver content. And so until you shift the mindset from I'm a deliverer of content to I'm a facilitator and designer of learning experiences, it doesn't matter what technology you bring into a classroom, teachers are still going to revert back to what they're comfortable with. All right. So I had an opportunity in about 2011, 2012 to spend a couple of years, about 3 years, pretty deeply engaged with now Stanford University's Graduate School of Education with an incredible researcher named Dr. Arnitha Ball, who had been studying teacher development for the previous almost 20 years. She was one of the first researchers and professors that I saw truly bring adult learning science into teacher development in a deep way. And what she created was something called the model of generative change Um, Not coincidental that she used the word generative back in 2010, because what she saw was when teachers engaged in themselves a reflective, action research based approach to their learning, teachers became generative in their learning process. And that's when these real shifts in mindset and these shifts in practice really began to happen. This was fundamentally different, Yi, than a teacher going to a day of professional development, being told a bunch of stuff, and then supposed to go back to their classroom and change their practice. What Dr. Ball was doing was a process of self reflection, engaging with new ideas, trying new practices, and ultimately having teachers be in this kind of generative flow. So when I think about this kind of learning process and experience and how I've chosen to both share and implement, it now incorporates andragogy, how we think about adult learners, and pedagogy, how we think about student and young learners. And if we can create classrooms where both of these things are present, Dr. Ball calls it you're in a constant state or co-creation of new knowledge. And think about our world now. Literally, we are constantly creating new. So if classrooms can mirror that, that's where I think the most power comes from.
Well, that's to me, it's already so powerful, the audience couldn't see me. I keep nodding while you're talking. Um, I have so many things going in my mind, and I'll just say whatever comes to my mind first.
Yeah.
Is like the your elaboration of teachers' engagement with their own mind is such a powerful reflection of how can we help teachers practice and enhance their own metacognitive
Yes.
activities. I agree with you 200% that maybe for a long time, back to the history, when we start to have lecture, which is considered the most economically viable model of teaching or knowledge distribution is you have one teacher in the lecture. Of course, at that time, books are expensive. Then talking, information transmitted by voice through air is the most economically sound plan. That's why people start to, doing lectures, start talking. And then for thousands of years, teachers are kind of confined this role. They were like, oh, I'm just delivering content. And, who made that content maybe doesn't matter, or it's become like so autopilot these days. And then, as a result, many of us stop thinking about or even stop challenging, oh, why do this? But like you mentioned, if teachers start to rethink about their role, that what if I'm just a facilitator, meaning I am no longer the center of knowledge or information transmission, but like you said, we are co-creating knowledge. And that's a super, manifestation of social constructivism, right? Where teachers are actually they have the content knowledge. They have the pedagogy knowledge because they all went through all this all these PD programs as part of their service, the pre-service training, and all they need to do is just think about how I can really engage in myself in that particular context and doing the scaffolding. And scaffolding is the hardest part of all because that means you have to, as a teacher, you have to establish this connection with your students, with your content. When you were talking, first thing coming to my mind, especially when you talk about the research with Dr. Ball, I was like, oh, TPAC, right? TPAC, technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge. And I started to think about this framework a little bit different now because maybe to me that was still pretty knowledge or content based, because we're talking about knowledge, it becomes content of information. But how are we becoming more analytical? How do we perform even critical thinking when we were trying to talk a lot about these frameworks as teachers or as supporters for the teachers, especially these days, requires a lot of reflection and innovative ways of doing.
Yeah. It really does. And I think that part of what I became, again, just so fascinated with Dr. Ball's research was it understood in some ways this progression of, for most of us, going all the way back to my first story of myself as a student, most of us don't really learn best by just hearing something. And then even if we do regurgitate it back, it's not necessarily retained knowledge. It's not acquired learning. It's I was able to hear something and give it back, right? And so what I think was so powerful about Dr. Ball's research and the model of generative change for me was it kind of blew that entire process up and said, what if instead, and I'm going to use a real kind of example of this, what if instead you took that teacher who maybe for their whole career, maybe they've been teaching for 20 years, 30 years, and have been a lecturer, but they've never thought that metacognitive awareness, they never thought, I'm lecturing. Like just literally just having that awareness. They're just thinking they're going and doing their job. This is how you teach. But what if they stopped for a second and thought, I'm lecturing at my students? And just that awareness allows you to then inquire, right? The next level from reflection is introspection. I've been lecturing at my students for 20 years now. I wonder if there's another way to do this. I may not know the way, but I just wonder, right? So the next phase of her process is something called ideological becoming. And that's when you begin to kind of wrestle with new ideas, talk to people. I'm going to bring in blended learning. This is interesting. I talked to my colleague about something called a station rotation, where I set up my classroom in stations, and like one station's collaborative and one station's digital, and one station might be where I'm doing teacher intervention. That's not a lecture. That's a different way to design my classroom. Interesting. The next phase of her process is called internalization. And that's where you have a chance to try a thing, right? So now I've reflected on my practice. I've learned some new ideas, right? Because I'm allowing those new ideas to come into my brain. Now let me go try it, right? So I go and I try the station rotation. I try the flipped classroom. And guess what? The first time I try it, guess how it goes? Terribly, right? Most times we try something new, it goes terribly wrong. And so even in the best PD, when teachers go back and they try something, it doesn't work. What typically happens? They say, oh, that didn't work at all. Let me go back to what? Being a lecturer, right? So this process of internalization that Dr. Ball really unpacked, where you're bringing in action research. All right, I tried the station rotation. It didn't work so well the first day. The students were disorganized. They didn't know what to do. Over there, the laptops didn't work and they were out of batteries. But now I'm doing action research. Okay, what can I adjust? All right, tomorrow I'm going to do a little bit different over here, a little bit different over here. And maybe over the course of weeks or even months, now my station rotation, because I'm allowing myself to be an action researcher, I'm adjusting to what I'm learning, right? And then the last kind of phase of Dr. Ball's research was this idea of generativity. And that's where the teacher and the learner are in this, again, constant mode of the teacher is learning his or her students. The teacher is engaging in deep reflection themselves. They're making adjustments based on what their students are learning. And now they're in this co-creation process every day. This is a generative classroom. And what Dr. Ball did in this model of generativity was she unpacked what it takes. Because if you think about most professional development, what's it look like? It looks like teachers sitting in a room, still hearing a lecture or hearing a presentation. And sometimes it's a great presenter, but it's not taking into account this flow of reflection, wrangling with new ideas, trying new things, engaging in adjustments and iteration. Rarely does professional development engage in that at all, right? And so what became then, again, what I became very passionate about was, what if we brought that to the world, right? What if we brought this version of professional development to the world? And it's been an incredible experience, because when you see a teacher light up and say, "Oh my goodness," right? I had a teacher who was teaching for almost 50 years and had no interest in changing her practice. She said, "I'm about to retire in 5 years." That teacher, I watched her when we went through this process with her say, "Oh my goodness, I'm learning again." Think about that. A 50-year teacher who was excited that she was learning again. And so that's where I think the opportunity is for us to bring a different experience, different version of what adult learners can be, especially teachers, especially with the world that we're now entering into.
Yeah, well, that's a super powerful move. I also want to probably dive a little bit deeper into this, especially about the equity perspective of it. Um, you know, I was thinking about a paper that I read about 3 years ago that truly transformed how I see education, how I see myself. The paper is titled The Social Class and Hidden Curriculum. What it is that this researcher back in the 80s, she went to 5 different schools that she picked as different representation of social class. From the working class, the middle class, the professional class, or the super elite class. And what she noticed that several patterns of how people are being taught and they are learning. And for example, in the working class, teacher lectures a lot, and they have to do exams. Teachers or the school admin made all the decisions students have to follow. While you move on to, for example, the professional class, that students were encouraged to speak more of their voices because their family are coming from people like who are lawyers, designers, and then when you go to the super elite class, for example, the way they learn about history in the working classes, yeah, this is, key historical events, re keep writing it down and then keep repeating it. We're gonna just text this at the same way. And on the other extreme, the super elite class, they do debates. They do project-based learning, what we call it right now. And teachers are facilitating the discussions. They have to do role plays. They have to gather materials. Let's see, they have to, understand how people were building the pyramids in ancient Egypt, things like that. And it was such a eye-opening paper to me because of course I can definitely recognize, when I was young, I classify myself as a working class, and I do all the pedagogy was just a reflection of me being the working class. I was like, what if, I was born into the super elite class or just a professional class? Will the way that I got trained, the way I got taught, be different? How will that be? And the takeaways of the paper, it's not just like, oh, your socioeconomic class determines everything, but it's more like, well, when students were learning, it's not just they are building financial capitals, they also need to build cultural and social capitals, that they need to learn about the symbolic meaning of how the society works, not just pure information transmission. And coming back to the teachers' professional development workshops you shared earlier, and if I'm labeling things right now, I feel like you were really trying to at least doing the you know the middle part, like the professional class and the super elite class of learning and you try to apply to the teachers, and the teachers were trying to transform the working class of learning. Well, I'm labeling things by by the work by the social class, but I definitely feel that when it comes to equity, it's not just how much money you make or how much money your household has. It is like, and the pedagogy work is kind of like so rooted in that. And I want to share this paper with you, and I want to hear how you think about this because I know from the very early on you were trying to, fight for better equity for more people. That's why you do the tutoring program, and you really do this in person, which is amazing. And did you notice like that, especially you also went to like, super elite schools like Penn, you work with uh, researchers from Stanford and other super elite school. Did you notice this kind of like differences, manifested in learning and teaching?
Definitely. I mean, so I had an experience of this myself. Again, in my growing up, the part I didn't share was I went to a pretty traditional public school from kindergarten through eighth grade. Then I went to a pretty elite private school for high school. And so as a learner, I definitely saw those differences in what learning looked like, how students engaged, a lot more debate, a lot more discussion, a lot more, the types of modalities you just spoke about. And then absolutely, I continue to see this in working in various environments, learning environments. So there's a massive equity issue here in what experience students are getting, right? And I want to point to something that I think that's the undertone of where you're going, and that is essentially what's happening in some of these environments, especially the more elite environments, or is students are being prepared for life differently. If you're just getting information and spitting it back out, that is a continuously decreasing valuable skill set, right? Because now, especially we're in a world of AI, and this was the case even 20 years ago, but now it's even more so. If you are only able to get information and give it back, you're bringing no additional value than what any, at this point, AI large language model can do. There's no additional value that you're able to bring as a human. The content is everywhere now. Information is now a commodity that's freely available, right? So in our book that I co-authored, Blended Learning in Action, we talk about a framework that is this umbrella. We call it the PAC, and it's this umbrella of personalization. And it stands for agency, meaning students having kind of ownership, choice, and voice in their learnings, making decisions in their learning. Authenticity, meaning students are given real world opportunities to demonstrate their learning, to learn in real ways. Connectivity, meaning students are in collaborative opportunities, whether it's with their peers or with experts or with their teachers, they're connecting with other people, right, in their learning process. And creativity, meaning they're actually designing things that matter for the world. They're creating something. Now, I want you to think about every example that you just used, whether it was debates, having, opportunities to present projects, they all fall under one or multiple of those areas: agency, authenticity, connectivity, and creativity, right? What people don't realize is when we thought of the PAC as these kind of experiences of learning that were so important, at the core of it is equity. Because when a student is engaging in agency, right, they're learning how to self-moderate themselves and self-regulate themselves as learners. That's an incredible skill that if any learner is able to have agency in the learning process and build that skill, you're giving that learner a chance to be a lifelong learner and adapt and adjust to whatever is happening in the world, right? Agency is a form of equity. When a student is given opportunities for authentic learning, let's say it's a debate about climate change or a debate about government, whatever it might be, what you're doing is you're giving that student an authentic skill in presentation, in research, in persuasive argument, right? You name it. When a student is having a chance to collaborate with their peers, like you mentioned, having group learnings in some of these elite environments, what you're giving that student is the skill of collaboration. You're giving that student the skill of maybe project management and how to work with teams and lead teams. Once again, these are skills that they carry on. And with creativity, we already know that when a student is able to create, to solve problems, to bring things to bear, that's a skill. So when I think about equity, it's entirely through this whole thing. Because when you design classrooms with this pack-oriented framework, that's what you described, right? You're actually designing for every student to have an equitable opportunity to build the skills they're going to need to thrive in life. If you keep students in this, like, I'm going to talk at you and then you're going to give it back to me, what skills are you building for that student's life? Not a whole lot, right? And so absolutely, Yi, there's a deep, deep equity component that's in this around how every student deserves to be in a multimodal classroom that incorporates this pack framework. And like you can say it in all kinds of different words and different ways, but ultimately it's these ideas of self-driven learning, connecting with peers, creating things, authenticity. That's where the real skills in life are coming from. And that's what happens in these elite environments, but often doesn't happen in many other environments.
Thank you for sharing. And I'm very happy you brought up AI. And, I also listened to many other episodes. And, for example, Sam Altman, like he was like, oh, what would be the most important skills in the age of AI? And he just said agency, right? Like you need to own your life. You need to feel like you're the owner of your life. And I like how you put it, like self-moderation, like moderate your way of learning. And you definitely have to become a lifeline learner because if you are just like a intermediate transmitter of information, right? AI can do that. Yeah.
Right.
And actually, regarding your company, Your Way of Learning, earlier this year, you founded a link, which is decades ago, and it become Your Way of Learning. I mean, the name tells a lot of things, right? We talk a lot about Your Way, Universal Design of Learning and Equity. I think that it's a wonderful name for this product. And you pivoted, I'm not sure if pivot is actually the right word here, but your company become more explicitly focusing on AI. Um, do you mind sharing that how like what is your mission and vision for your way of learning? Especially, I think the listeners will be very curious because on your website you mentioned your way is described as pedagogically trained. Do you mind unpacking that for the audience from the
Yeah.
both, like pedagogical side and also the technical side of it?
Absolutely. So a couple of things happened in the last 10 years. COVID was a big factor in this, but the mission, interestingly enough, is hasn't changed at all. My mission as a human, the mission as a company is to bring learner-centered pedagogy into every classroom, to create experiences that work for every learner, quite simply. And so prior to Your Way, the work, as I talked about with Link, was much more focused on a direct professional development of teachers. It was bringing in this research-based andragogical approach to teacher development, reflective practice, bringing in new ideas, helping teachers internalize new behaviors and new practices. And essentially, it was a coaching model where teachers were able to engage with our coaches with an online platform. But it was very much in the world of professional development that required teachers to, do some work, right? They had to do some work. They had to go into modules. They had to engage with coaches. So as we all know, COVID happened in 2020, 21, and it dramatically impacted everything. Okay. One of the things that happened post-COVID, we all went to Zoom, we had to go virtual, right? But post-COVID, there was significant additional challenges that teachers and students walked back into. We know that student social and emotional issues were more significant. We know that learner variability was much higher. After, quote unquote, missing 2 years of school, some students came back and, they had regressed considerably, or some students came back and, they were just these widening gaps, right? We know that when teachers came back, there was more complex linguistic classrooms, cultural classrooms, more complex technology in classrooms. And so what ended up happening was after COVID, no surprise to anybody, the teaching profession became almost untenable. It was a very difficult job to have with all these new challenges. That was already a tough job, but now post-COVID, you had all these additional challenges. So where this is going is where pre-COVID, you could engage a teacher in a workshop or in coaching. After COVID, teachers were saying, I'm barely staying afloat. I'm treading water. I don't have it in me to go and do another workshop or to go and do coaching over here. I'm just staying afloat. So what we realized was the mission doesn't change, but the profession had changed. And we had to adapt to now what teachers could still benefit from in a way that they were able to receive. Okay. So 2023, generative AI becomes available, right? We know that November, ChatGPT is launched. And pretty quickly we realized this is something that is very powerful, obviously, that could have a tremendous impact on learning. And we also realized that the work that we were doing with workshops and coaching, that there was another way to do it. So remember I talked about this phase of internalization in Dr. Ball's model? Yeah. So that's the phase that, quite frankly, teachers struggle the most with, because, you can go listen to a great workshop, but if it's bringing it back to the classroom, right? That's where people always say, but did you take it back to the classroom, right? You enjoyed the workshop, you learned this new thing, but did you actually do it? And there's a massive drop off in teachers actually doing the new practice, right? So what we said was, what if we made that hurdle way, way, way smaller? Okay. So what we did with Your Way was we designed a system that already had the pedagogical training embedded, how to differentiate for multilanguage learners, how to scaffold for students of different skill abilities, how to create projects-based learning classrooms based on student interest, how to create playlists that allowed students to actually have that agency. These are all very difficult things to do. So what we did was we embedded these things into Your Way because we had that knowledge of pedagogy. And then we said, all right, now with generative AI, instead of a teacher having to go to a 2-hour workshop to learn differentiation, what if they just had a tool to differentiate their lesson plan based on the specific needs of their learners? So essentially what we did was we stayed with the same mission of elevating teacher practice and pedagogy, but we just flipped or inverted the model to make the hardest part of it the easiest. You now have the differentiated lesson. You now have the projects-based learning plan. You now have the scaffolded for multi-language learners. It's at your fingertips. Go and do it. And the amazing thing, Yi, is that we have had the most accelerated growth that we've ever seen. Because back to adult learners learn best when they're doing something. And this allowed them to take their learning right to the point of the most important place, which is I'm now doing this thing in my classroom with my students. Game changer. So what your way is doing is it's effectively making what was a very difficult, time-consuming process, leveraging generative AI. We've now taken that and made it extremely easy for a teacher to work new practices, to try new things, to take new learning into their classroom. And it's been incredible. We're literally seeing an entirely new opportunity for how to support teacher practice.
That is amazing. What you described to me is like a new paradigm of designing AI products, to be honest. You know, for example, previously the PD workshops is very principle driven, right? Like I want to share this pack model with you. I want to bring you the effective practices. I want to, spread out these new values of being a facilitator. But in fact, the in classroom teachers, everything they faced are problems.
Yeah.
You cannot tell them you cannot emphasize more of the importance of the principles.
Yeah.
We 200% agree, but they are just faced with problems. So how about you building an AI tool that is problem driven rather than principle driven? And teachers know their problems, right? Like
Yeah.
you have a list out some of them already. And they are once you made them feel like, oh, your tool can help them solve their problems, they're
Mhm.
willing to share more context with you. And I believe that kind of helped them to customize the outcome of the tool generation even more.
Yeah.
So when I was reading your product's webpage, it was part of my research.
Yeah.
I found out that your way allows the teachers to iteratively refine the plans.
Yeah.
I wonder how, like in practice, how are educators using that feature? And
Yeah.
the reason why I ask this question is, like teachers knows their students the best. They know the context.
Yeah.
And your tool is trying to bridge the gap between teachers, knowledge of a certain pedagogical domain,
Mhm.
and just give them that particular useful information on demand when it's most needed. And of course, there are many technical ways to enhance like a recommendation system. You do like RAG, you do refine, and you name it. It's a common practice now. There's no more mystery. However, how to help the teachers realize that they need to provide certain information, how to encourage the teachers like, oh, you can actually, do iterations on the plan using the tool, how to elicit the teacher, oh, maybe I need to think about this aspect of the context that I need to share that with the tool and using AI. I think, that part of the user experience is really challenging. So I wonder, what is your observation? What is your takeaways?
So the at the core of what our work is we want the teacher to remain in the driver's seat as truly the designer. We don't want the teacher to hand that over to AI, right? As you mentioned, the teacher knows their students the best, right? They know the interventions that they might, may be needed, or at least they know what they're trying to accomplish with their learners. So one of the things that we said was we don't want for AI to take the from the human what is very important for the teacher to be the designer and facilitator of. Okay. But we knew that we were trying to solve for, in my opinion, two big challenges. Number one, when we're honest about it, prompting for AI is not an easy thing to do. This is a skill. This is a skill that many people get paid a lot of money to do, right? And it takes something to be a really, really great prompter. Okay. For most teachers, with all they have on their plate, adding to it, go and become an expert prompt engineer is probably not a realistic or fair thing to put on their plate. Okay. Now, second that with, for many teachers, instruction is very difficult. And planning a differentiated classroom or scaffolded lesson or projects-based or playlist lesson or flip learning is also a very difficult skill. These are not easy things to do, even if whether you are a new teacher or a 20-year veteran. Not only do these take time, but these are complex things to do. So what we said was, how can we make the teacher role one that they're able to focus on the most important thing for a teacher? And that is getting to know your students and then being able to design and facilitate a classroom that works the best for all of your learners. Okay. So in your way, what we did was we said, we're going to create a user experience that supports the prompting. Okay. You don't have to be an expert in prompting to get an amazing projects-based learning plan aligned to your school system, aligned to your state, aligned to your instructional priorities. You don't have to be an expert teacher even, because most teachers are not. We have first-year teachers, second teachers, even 10-year teachers still learn differentiation. You don't have to be an expert at every instructional strategy to be able to get really powerful, pedagogical, aligned, and learning science plans. So what your way is doing is it's bringing together the prompting supports alongside of the pedagogical supports. So now when a teacher goes into any one of our tools, be it designing for student agency, planning a lesson, scaffolding for multi-language learners, with a couple of simple inputs, that teacher is getting the best output that's driven by research, driven by learning science. And then when they get that output, they're able to make edits, request changes, make adjustments, do iterations, all embedded in the platform. So now that teacher is becoming a designer of that learning experience with the support of AI, right? And what we hear all the time, Yi, is what I just created using your way was 10 times better than what I would have done on my own. Mm-hmm. And I still was able to have the input that was necessary for me to get there. Right. And so the teachers are using your way in many ways as a thought partner in this planning and instructional journey that they can trust is going to help them elevate their practice and meet the needs of their learners.
That is great. And I'm so happy you brought up this topic of AI literacy, the prompt engineering. There's a lot of debates on AI literacy for teachers. And I really like how you frame your ways AI assistant as your thought partner.
Yeah.
Because that means true collaboration between AI and the teacher. And the teacher are now in the driver's seat. Yeah. And I'm very curious in this sense that how you evaluate that the output or the deliverable response from your tool is exactly what the teachers are looking for. For example, teachers have different personality, and I'm also happy you brought up like the probably the younger teachers or the less experienced teachers who, because maybe, statistically speaking of their age, they are more tech savvy. And then the way they sing things, they probably use more TikTok than the teacher who has been teaching for 50 years. So I think the audience tuning and it's not, and also using AI, it's not just like, oh, I'm giving you this worksheets. Oh, I'm explaining this pedagogical concept to you so you can use it. Like you said, you've done years of in-person workshops
Yeah.
really trying to scaffolding teachers. And
Yeah.
now the AI response, all the tools, lesson plans it created, I feel they also need to make sense to the teachers first. They need to scaffold the teachers first. And once the teacher fully understand, they have the intention, they have the purpose, they internalize it, they can envision them actually teaching that. That's where the credibility of this tool comes in. And so I'm just curious, how does your team and you kind of see this type of, building the connection between the AI and the teachers in terms of like, does your tool scaffolding the teachers? How do you like bring the best to the teachers personally?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I'm going to complicate it even further
Oh,
because
yeah,
if
of
you think
course.
about it, for most teachers, they're not just working on behalf of themselves, they're working within a system. They're working with probably in a school that has certain pedagogical priorities and approaches and frameworks, right? That the teacher is charged to bring into their classroom, right? Whether it's a STEM magnet school, or maybe it's a school for math and science, or maybe it's a school for social justice, or maybe it's a school for arts, right? So most teachers aren't even just trying to figure out my individual voice, but how do I bring in my priorities within my school, right? And then that school is typically working within a network of schools or a district that has maybe a portrait of a learner or has specific district priorities or needs that the district vision requires. And then probably they're working in a state that has standards that they're trying to follow, right? So what's really interesting to me about what's happening with AI and how we've approached this is the school systems at large have a coherence issue
Mhm.
where if this teacher's over here doing this thing with ChatGPT and this teacher's over here and they're prompting this with Gemini and this teacher's over here and they're prompting with Perplexity or Claude, imagine the coherence issues that come up in a school system, right? So what we've said is if we're going to really understand and support scaled transformation, AI can't just be this random thing that just gives outputs. It actually needs to be in alignment with the entire system, right? So the reason why we call it your way is you're able to customize and adapt your organization's engine, if you will, to your specific standards, priorities, instructional frameworks, curriculum, student needs, etc. So now your way is creating coherence across the system. Okay. That's a very different proposition than, oh, I'm going to go to ChatGPT and get a lesson plan. And hopefully, fingers crossed, it's a lesson plan that works in my school. Right? Maybe, but probably not. So your way is designed where it's customized along the alignment and coherence goals of an entire system. So now when the teacher gets it, they can trust it's giving me my priorities already embedded, the instructional frameworks, the resources, my standards, whether they're state or district, um, uh, the way the pedagogical approach that my school or district wants me to take, right? Already embedded. So now when the teacher is making their adjustments and their refinement, they're not starting from, oh my gosh, I got to figure out all these different things. They're starting from, all right, now in my classroom, what's my voice and what do my students need? Right? It's a very different coherence driven approach that allows a system as large as New York City or as small as River Valley, which is a small rural district outside of Pittsburgh, regardless of your size, you're now driving coherence.
Mm.
And so the teacher, because they're still that kind of that designer, but within these guardrails, if you will, now the teacher is able to bring their voice, able to make the adjustments with confidence that they're not coming out of what the goal is of their broader system.
That is so great. Um, the coherence part is something I think edtech AI companies are struggling around the globe, right? As long as if they want to serve the teachers, then every region has their own regulations and policy, and I couldn't agree with you more. Education is not just a personal thing or personalized thing. It
Yeah.
is, we are all more or less embedded and rooted, in the system.
Yeah.
It really requires like system thinking to diagnosis, analysis, and doing reflections. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences of building your way. And we talk a lot, about your personal journey and your way. And I do want to share. I do want to move on and then talk about your collaboration with Penn GSE, especially launching the AI Foundation courses. We talk about like how your way was designed to make teachers no longer worry about the technical part of it. And I know this AI Foundation courses is for non-technical teachers. And Jason, I think your work, your way in particular, like isn't just building a product. You are also educating educators. So how did the partnership with Penn GSE come about to create this AI foundational course?
Yeah, so this has been a super exciting partnership for us. Penn GSE is globally known as a leader in learner-centered pedagogy and one of the top graduate schools of education. So it's been an honor. It's also been a incredible experience as a graduate of Penn GSE to now have a chance to do this collaborative work with the university. And it was interesting because the way this came about was pretty organic.
Hmm.
So when you look at so much of the research that's coming out now from teachers, they're saying over and over again, survey data is saying over and over again, they're not prepared for AI classrooms. There's not enough professional development. It's not the right professional development. Literally, teachers are saying, this thing is now in my classroom. My students are using it. I still need a lot more help on what to do with it. So there's a big need in teacher PD, right? I spoke earlier about teacher PD being my background, right? And when we began to look at this, and I'm doing some work with John Gamba, who I know you know very well,
Yeah,
and
he has been our guest before, and that
he's
was a
also been a
wonderful episode.
guest.
Yeah.
And John is such an innovative thinker, and he knew and was a previous partner of our work around professional development. So he really knew the depth of how we think about PD. But what John also knew was we don't just come at this, like you said, from a just professional development or just product standpoint. We're always thinking about how can the two really intertwine. So as we began to continue the conversations with John and with the team at Penn GSE, we began to realize, wait a minute, there's a need for a foundational course or courses that not only serve as how do you use your way, but how do you rethink your instructional practice now in an AI world? And whether I am again, 20-year veteran teacher or just coming into the field, there's a shift that's happening right now in bringing pedagogy differently into classrooms. So the course that we created together, that is now a certified course with Penn GSE, is an AI Foundations course that helped teachers think about, how do I leverage AI for differentiation? How do I leverage AI to boost engagement? How do I leverage AI to better meet the needs of my learners? How do I leverage AI responsibly and ethically, right? And so this is a very unique course that I couldn't be more thrilled about, that has some of the top minds from Penn GSE, some of our team, that's sharing these years of understanding blended learning and personalized learning, and now incorporating it into a course that is what I think is already a tremendous contribution to supporting teachers now in this AI space.
That's great. Earlier I did talk about AI literacy in the courses.
Yeah.
The reason I brought that up was, like I did see when people think about AI literacy, they want to bring this kind of anxiety, like this
Yeah.
fear of missing out, FOMO emotions.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate that you share your thoughts in a very honest way. That in this case, we name it like AI foundational courses. It is to close the gap of teachers. Like if you know nothing about AI and now you become curious,
Yeah.
and what could be, one of the many meaningful ways to learn about it. And like when I look at the curriculum, one thing
Yeah.
I'm very interested is, it's self-paced, it's 5 week long, and as part of the package, teacher learn about the AI literacy or the AI after teachers learn about AI fundamentals, they can immediately go to your way to
Yeah.
practice. And
That's right.
that's amazing because that exactly echo back to what you mentioned earlier about pedagogy, right?
Mhm.
Adults learn the best
Mhm.
when they are able to practice it. In the past, I taught high school students about how to use AI, and
Yeah.
it was prompt engineering. I did demos with my WeChat group members
Yeah.
about building the products, or
Yeah.
vibe coding. Again, it's prompt engineering, and
Mhm.
the I feel the most challenging part is always, oh, after this, what gonna do with it?
Yeah.
So
It's
it's really amazing that, we talk about your tool and people now, um, more or less, I hope they understand where it
yeah.
is from, and they have a way to really, practice, see whether, at least like, we know pedagogy is a buzzword these days for
Yeah.
AI tech, but it's a good trend. At least we're talking about it. People
Right.
think it is important, and we also need to test and verify, if it's exactly like what we say. So having this is really important. So, um, when you were co-designing or collaborating on this course, what is one of your favorite modules or lessons in the course?
Oh,
What would be the, something that participants have a aha moment about using AI in the classroom?
oh, that's a great one. So there's several, and there's just some really great stuff that the Penn professors bring in. One of them that I really, really like is leveraging AI for differentiation is one of my favorites, because this is something that so many teachers, this is a struggle. This is when you go into any classroom, it's one of the things that almost invariably you don't see enough of. And quite frankly, when differentiation in a classroom is not present, that's when you start to lose students, because they're saying, I'm sitting here and I'm not getting what I need. So I'm going to check out. I'm going to, maybe there's behavior issues. So probably my favorite module is the module that talks about how to leverage AI, and then using your way specifically, but how to leverage AI for differentiation. Because that to me is such an important unlocking that for decades, I would argue centuries, like you said, was very difficult in a teacher-centered classroom. Teacher lecturing to all the students and lecturing, in most cases, to the middle, right? And I would even argue that the middle wasn't even effective lecturing, right? So when I think about the real unlocking that's possible is now with AI, understanding how to differentiate, and that module does a great job with supporting this process. You're now able to completely open up the experience of learning, and then sky's the limit. Because once you can really get differentiation as a, wait a minute, I can do this. I have students of different languages. I have students of different skill sets. I have students of different interests. I have students at different reading levels. But wait a minute, there's a way for me to organize this classroom to better support each of them. That to me is the unlocking, right? So that's probably, like I said, there's so much good stuff in there. That's probably my favorite.
That's awesome. Now I have one final question,
Yeah.
and that's not gonna be an easy one.
Okay, got it.
I always save the most difficult one to the
Yeah.
like I on this podcast, I have interviewed at entrepreneurs in both China, Europe, and a lot in the United States. And I'm always very touched by their missions of transforming education. At the same time, and which I also appreciate is they share a lot of their concerns to me about leverage AI education, as well as with now with AI, I can do the programming, AI can do the marketing. The competitions they are faced with is a lot more fierce, is a lot more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Especially given the local situation in the United States, all the school systems and regulations and policies,
Yeah.
which adds another layer of complications here
Yeah.
for your business expansion.
Yeah.
But after all, business is business. Like you need to, be financially sustainable.
Yeah.
And in the United States, we all know that, there are some major players in this market, right? I'm not gonna name it. I believe the audience is gonna know about it. So the difficult, the challenging question I'm saving at the end is, how do you see, like 5 years from now, how do you see your way gonna grow? And what is your thoughts on your ways, for example, positioning, value proposition, and faced with, different players, do you see any collaborative ways among all these players? After all, we're all trying to make education better. And also, at the same time, we are competitors after all. So
Yeah.
I'm curious about your experience and your thoughts if you are willing to share some of them. Totally
Yeah.
up to you.
Yeah. So this is a I think a really big one, because one of the things that obviously we keep front of mind is you have to understand the competitive marketplace. You have to understand where the market is going. I believe that we're still very early in this is a very nascent market. I think that this is something that is I've been in the tech and education world long enough to see a whole lot of technology that people thought was going to be transformative that was not. And I am cautiously optimistic that in this case, we don't have a choice then for this technology to be transformative, if for no other reason than the sheer force that it will have on the marketplace, on the job force, on the skills required for people to be successful and to thrive. It's going to force us to think differently about schooling. Okay. So that being said, I think we're early in the game, right? And if you go back in not too distant history, there were a lot of early players that shook out. Where's MySpace, right? Where's Netscape, right? There's a lot of early companies that were kind of early entrants, and a lot evolved as the market matured, as people got more educated about product needs. So that being said, I think we're very early on. I also think that this is such a large market that ultimately there's going to be a fair number of players. that are able to have really important businesses and come at this from different ways because we're all still learning this new product category, right? And so I think that there's still a lot of learning even in the product development components of this. Many of the competitors that we have are just coming out with, including ourselves, student experiences. And so I think that there's going to be a even larger kind of divergence of what that looks like and the philosophy of learning. There's a lot of chatbots coming out and AI tutors. The research is already showing that that's actually not a great way for students to learn. It makes you think that you're learning something when you're actually not really because of the AI kind of assisted experience. So I think that there's going to be also a maturing of the market as we learn what things seemed really, really awesome in the beginning, but maybe it was not more than hype. And as things play out, maybe it wasn't even ideal for learning science. So I share that to say we're very early. What I'm hopeful about and what I believe is with our team and how we think about learning is even since we began this work, 20, 25 years ago, myself and my team, one thing that hasn't changed is our commitment to pedagogy, right? The commitment to pedagogy runs all the way through. So if you read our book, which we wrote in 2016, Blended Learning in Action today, it's still applicable because for us, it wasn't about a hype train of AI or a hype train of technology or a hype train of virtual learning or virtual reality. It was about pedagogy. It was about culture. It was about mindset. So one thing that I feel very good about as far as our positioning is we're pedagogy first. The technology is going to change many times over. Even now, generative AI, in very soon, we're going to be in artificial general intelligence, right? That's even going to be shifting. But pedagogy has lasted, right? So the learning science embedded, the deep customization and really allowing for schools and school systems to customize AI their way, right? i.e., your way. And then that coherence that we talked about earlier and being able to support systems at scale. That's something that we're not seeing in a lot of some of the other products is the deep customization and deep coherence that allows for any school system to really think about this from their lens. So I'm excited for the future. I think that this is going to be a really a lot's going to shake out in these next 2 or 3 years because again, I think products are going to start to have more divergences, and we're going to see where is the impact. My last hope, Yi, is that the market, and I say the market, I mean superintendents, principals, curriculum, chief academic officers. I really hope that more quickly than not, we can get off of the AI hype and really go deep into impact. Where is the learning happening? How is it happening? If we can get past the AI hype and noise and solve real practical challenges in learning, then I think we all win because then the right products that are actually supporting students and supporting teachers will be the ones that come to the forefront. And I definitely believe and plan for us to be so.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. It's so reassuring to hear this from a veteran like you. That's, also one
Yeah.
of the many reasons why I want to have you on the podcast. Um, I feel like your commitment to bring pedagogy to practice and to change teachers, students, and then when AI comes in, it was purely a leverage, is the intermediate to the eventual end of can we make learning better for people who are in need. I feel like this is gonna be the North Star that's gonna lead us through, when we come to the
Yeah.
product pivots or hard decisions. And I'm pretty sure that listeners, especially the Chinese educators and edtech companies, will learn a great and get very inspired by the whole episode, especially by what you mentioned just now. I'm pretty sure they will check out your products and learn more about you. So, everyone, that was Jason Green, a builder, thinker, and advocate shaping the future of teaching with AI. What stood out to me in this conversation today is how deeply Jason and the Your Way team have grounded their AI platform, not just in productivity, but in pedagogy research and whole child learning. If you are an educator curious about AI and you are wondering where to start, consider exploring the AI Foundations course co-developed by Your Way Learning and Penn GSE. It is a 5-week online program designed for busy, non-technical educators, and it shows you how to thoughtfully integrate AI into your classroom with purpose and confidence. Of course, you can learn more about Your Way Learning at yourwaylearning.com or enroll now at onlinelearning.upenn.edu. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow educator or edtech builders. Of course, the Chinese version will come out soon. This is AI Idiot Crafters, where AI meets pedagogy and ideas become impact. I'm your host, E. Until next time, stay curious and keep building the future of learning. Thank you, everyone.